Chapter 1. The Christmas Party. Tom Davenport adjusted the collar of his navy blazer for the third time, wondering if it looked too formal for a company Christmas party. He wasn't the kind of man who fussed over appearances, at least not before life had taught him how fragile everything could be. Now every detail mattered. Stability mattered. Predictability mattered. And tonight, he was determined to make sure his 5-year-old daughter had a good time, even if he had to endure small talk and awkward holiday games. "Daddy, do I look like a princess?" Abby twirled in her red velvet dress, the hem flaring like a bell. Her blonde curls bounced with each spin, and her patent leather shoes clicked against the hardwood floor of their apartment. Tom smiled, the kind of smile that softened the hard edges of his face. "You look better than a princess," he said, crouching to fix the bow at the back of her dress. "You look like the Queen of Christmas." Abby giggled and threw her arms around his neck. "Then you're the king. Yes, that makes me responsible for all the royal snacks," he teased, lifting her into his arms. She smelled faintly of strawberry shampoo and the peppermint candy she'd begged for earlier. For a moment, Tom let himself breathe her in, grounding himself in the simple truth. She was his world. Everything else, career, ambition, pride, came second. The party was already in full swing when they arrived at Wilson & Company's downtown office. The lobby had been transformed into a winter wonderland, complete with twinkling lights, garlands draped over the banisters, and a towering Christmas tree that looked like it had been plucked from a magazine spread. A jazz trio played carols near the refreshment table, and the scent of cinnamon and roasted chestnuts floated through the air. Tom balanced Abby on his hip as he navigated the crowd. Familiar faces greeted him, co-workers, junior architects, even a few clients who had been invited for the festivities. He nodded politely, offering the same warm but measured smile he'd perfected over the years. He wasn't antisocial, not exactly. He just didn't have the energy for the kind of charm he used to wield so easily before everything changed. "Tom," a booming voice cut through the chatter. Jackson Wilson, founder and CEO of the firm, strode toward him with the confidence of a man who had built an empire from blueprints and grit. His silver hair gleamed under the lights, and his tailored suit looked effortless. Jackson had always been larger than life to Tom, not just as a boss but as a mentor, almost a second father. "Jackson," Tom said, shifting Abby so he could shake the older man's hand. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas to you too." Jackson's eyes crinkled as he looked at Abby. "And who is this young lady? Don't tell me she's old enough for kindergarten already." Abby grinned shyly. "I'm 5, she announced, holding up her fingers like proof. "5? Well, that makes you the most important guest here tonight." Jackson winked at her before turning back to Tom. "Glad you came. Wouldn't be the same without you." Tom nodded, feeling that familiar swell of gratitude. Jackson had been there when Tom's world collapsed 3 years ago, offering not just condolences but flexibility, understanding, and a steady hand when Tom needed it most. Loyalty wasn't just a word to Tom. It was a debt he intended to honor. They chatted for a few minutes about holiday plans and the latest projects before Jackson excused himself to make an announcement. Tom watched as the older man climbed the small stage near the tree, tapping the microphone until the room quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jackson began, his voice carrying easily, "thank you for joining us tonight. It's been a remarkable year for Wilson & Company, and that's because of all of you. Your hard work, your creativity, your dedication. It's what makes this company more than just a business. It makes us a family." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Tom clapped along. Abby perched on his knee now, her eyes wide at the glittering tree. Jackson continued, "And speaking of family, I have some exciting news. Starting in January, we'll be welcoming a new member to our leadership team, someone who shares our vision and values. Please join me in congratulating my daughter, Megan Wilson, who will be stepping in as our new senior project manager." The applause was louder this time, though Tom felt a flicker of surprise. Megan Wilson. He'd heard her name in passing over the years but had never met her. Jackson had mentioned she worked in design for a firm out west, but that was the extent of it. Now she was not only joining the company, she was going to be his direct supervisor. Tom's stomach tightened, though not in alarm. Change wasn't his favorite thing these days, but he trusted Jackson. If Megan was anything like her father, the transition would be smooth. He wasn't about to start borrowing trouble. Megan stepped onto the stage, and Tom's first impression was striking. She was tall, poised, with chestnut hair swept into a sleek bun and a crimson dress that managed to be both professional and festive. Her smile was polished, her handshake firm as she greeted a few people near the front. There was confidence in her posture, the kind that came from knowing exactly who you were and what you wanted. Tom watched from a distance, Abby tugging at his sleeve. "Daddy, is that the boss lady?" He chuckled. "Something like that. She looks like the mean teacher in my cartoons," Abby whispered, her voice full of innocent mischief. Tom bit back a laugh. "Let's not judge by appearances, okay? She might be very nice." Abby tilted her head, unconvinced. "She doesn't look like she likes cookies." "Well," Tom said, scanning the dessert table, "maybe we'll find out." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of holiday cheer. Tom exchanged pleasantries, kept Abby entertained with gingerbread cookies and a coloring station, and tried not to think too hard about January. He wasn't worried, not really. Jackson wouldn't put someone in charge who didn't belong there. And Tom had learned the hard way that worrying about the future was a waste of energy. All he could do was show up, do his job, and keep Abby safe and happy. Still, as he watched Megan laughing with a group of junior architects, something about her expression made him pause. It wasn't unkind, exactly, but there was an edge there, a sharpness beneath the charm. Tom filed the observation away, telling himself it was nothing. First impressions could be misleading. By the time he bundled Abby into her coat and stepped out into the crisp December night, snowflakes were drifting lazily from the sky, catching in her curls like tiny stars. She held his hand tightly, her mittened fingers warm against his. "Daddy," she said as they walked toward the car, "do you think the boss lady likes Christmas?" Tom smiled faintly, unlocking the door. "I think everyone likes Christmas." Abby climbed into her booster seat, her voice soft as she added, "I hope she likes you." The words hit him harder than he expected. He closed the door gently, staring at the snow for a moment before sliding behind the wheel. He hoped so too. For Abby's sake. For the sake of the quiet, fragile life he'd built from the wreckage. As the car pulled away from the glowing lights of the office, Tom told himself the same thing he'd been telling himself for 3 years. One day at a time. That was all he could promise. One day at a time. Chapter 2. New Year, New Boss. January arrived with the kind of gray skies that made Tom Davenport grateful for indoor work. Snow clung stubbornly to the edges of sidewalks, and the city hummed with the quiet rhythm of winter routines. For Tom, the first weeks of the new year were a balancing act, keeping projects on schedule while making sure Abby adjusted to her new kindergarten semester without a hitch. He had expected Megan Wilson's arrival to cause ripples in the office. New leadership always did. But the transition was surprisingly smooth, at least on the surface. Megan was professional, polished, and efficient. She held meetings that started on time and ended on time, and she seemed determined to learn every detail of the firm's operations. Tom respected that. He respected competence. Still, there was something about her presence that made the air feel different. Not hostile, not yet. Just sharper, like the hum of electricity before a storm. "Morning, Tom." Megan's voice was crisp as she stepped into the design room one Tuesday. She wore a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The team looked up from their screens, a mix of curiosity and caution in their eyes. "Morning," Tom replied, setting down his coffee. He kept his tone even, his posture relaxed. No reason to make this complicated. Megan scanned the room, her gaze lingering on the blueprints spread across the central table. "I've reviewed the preliminary designs for the Riverside project," she said. "Solid work overall, but I think we can push the envelope a little more." Tom nodded. "Any specific areas you'd like us to revisit?" "The facade," she said without hesitation. "It feels safe, predictable. I want bold. Something that makes people stop and stare." Tom felt a flicker of irony. Bold used to be his middle name, before life taught him how quickly bold could turn into broken. He swallowed the thought and kept his voice steady. "We can explore some alternatives." "Good." Megan's smile was quick, almost perfunctory. "I'll expect revisions by Friday." She turned to leave, her heels echoing like punctuation marks. Tom watched her go, then exhaled slowly. Friday. That gave them 3 days to rework a design that had already passed client approval. He didn't say it out loud, what was the point? But the word unnecessary hovered in his mind like a shadow. At home that evening, Tom found Abby sprawled on the living room rug, coloring a picture of a snowman with a purple crayon. "Daddy, look," she said, holding up the masterpiece. "He's magic because he's purple." Tom grinned, loosening his tie. "That's the most magical snowman I've ever seen." Abby beamed, then tilted her head. "Did the boss lady like your work today?" Tom blinked. "What? You said she's the boss lady now," Abby reminded him, her tone matter of fact. "Did she like your buildings?" Tom chuckled, sinking onto the couch. "She had some ideas." "Good ideas?" Abby asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Tom hesitated, then smiled softly. "Different ideas." Abby considered this, then shrugged. "Maybe she just wants a purple snowman building." Tom laughed, the sound easing something tight in his chest. "Maybe she does." February brought more of the same, Megan settling into her role with a confidence that bordered on audacity. She wasn't rude, not exactly, but her critiques carried an edge, and her expectations seemed to shift like sand underfoot. Tom adapted because that's what he did. Adapt, adjust, endure. For Abby. Always for Abby. Still, the strain showed in small ways. Late nights at the office. Missed dinners. The quiet guilt of watching Abby fall asleep on the couch waiting for him. One Friday evening, Tom arrived home to find his sister, Claire, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Abby, both of them surrounded by construction paper and glitter. "You're late," Claire said, arching an eyebrow. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her sweatshirt bore the evidence of a glitter explosion. "Sorry," Tom said, dropping his briefcase by the door. Work ran long. Work always runs long, Claire replied, not unkindly. She glanced at Abby, who was humming to herself as she glued sequins onto a paper heart. You're lucky she's easy to entertain. Tom crouched beside his daughter, brushing a curl from her forehead. What are we making? Valentine's, Abby announced, for everyone, even the boss lady. Tom froze for half a second, then smiled. That's thoughtful. Abby grinned. I'm gonna put extra glitter on hers so she likes you. Claire snorted. Kids got strategy. Tom shot her a look, but his sister just grinned wider. What? She's not wrong. The following week, Tom found himself in a meeting that stretched longer than necessary. Megan was outlining her vision for the upcoming Harborview project, her tone brisk, her gestures precise. Tom listened, took notes, and kept his expression neutral. He had learned long ago that silence was often the safest response. When the meeting finally ended, he gathered his papers and headed for the elevator. That's when he heard her voice behind him. Tom. He turned. Megan stood a few feet away, her posture impeccable, her expression unreadable. Do you have a minute? She asked. Sure. He followed her into a quiet corner near the windows, the city sprawling beyond the glass like a frozen tapestry. I wanted to say, Megan began, her tone softer now. I appreciate your adaptability. I know some of these changes haven't been easy. Tom studied her face, searching for sincerity. I want what's best for the projects, he said simply. I believe that. Her smile was brief, almost reluctant. You've been with the company a long time. 14 years, Tom said. That's rare these days. Megan's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she looked away. Anyway, I just thought you should know your work doesn't go unnoticed. Tom nodded, unsure what to make of the exchange. Gratitude? Diplomacy? Something else entirely? He didn't dwell on it. He had learned not to. By the time February melted into March, the rhythm of change felt almost normal. Almost. Tom told himself he could handle it. He had handled worse. And yet, in the quiet moments, when Abby was asleep and the apartment was still, he felt the weight pressing down. The weight of uncertainty. The weight of a future he couldn't quite see. One evening, as snow flurries danced outside the window, Abby climbed onto his lap with a book about fairy tales. Daddy, she said, her voice drowsy. Do you think the boss lady is a witch? Tom blinked, startled. What? No. Why would you think that? Abby shrugged, her curls tickling his chin. She wears black shoes and talks like the witches in my stories. Tom laughed softly, kissing the top of her head. She's not a witch, sweetheart. Then why do you look sad when you talk about her? The question pierced deeper than he expected. He held her close, his voice gentle. I'm not sad. Just tired. Abby yawned, snuggling against him. Maybe you need a magic wand. Tom smiled faintly, staring at the snow beyond the glass. A magic wand. If only life worked that way. Chapter 3. The red flag. March crept in with the promise of spring, though the city still wore winter's gray coat. Tom Davenport sat at his desk, reviewing the latest drafts for the Harborview project, when the email notification popped up on his screen. Subject: Team Adjustment Harborview from Megan Wilson. Tom clicked it open, scanning the brief message. Effective immediately, Jason will be removed from the Harborview team. Please redistribute his tasks accordingly. New team member, Emily Chan, recent graduate, University of Michigan. Tom frowned, leaning back in his chair. Jason was a solid junior architect, green in some areas, sure, but eager and dependable. His work on Harborview had been strong, and Tom had mentored him personally. Removing him without warning felt off. He rubbed his temple, resisting the urge to march into Megan's office. Confrontation wasn't his style, not anymore. He'd learned the hard way that battles cost more than they were worth. Still, the decision gnawed at him. It wasn't just the disruption. It was the pattern. First, a quiet critique here, a subtle reshuffle there. Now, outright replacement. Tom closed the email and returned to his blueprints, telling himself to focus. One day at a time. That was the rule. 2 weeks later, the unease deepened. Another email. Another removal, this time Mark from the Lakeside project. Replaced by a woman fresh out of grad school. Tom noticed the trend but kept his thoughts to himself. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe Megan had a vision for the team. Maybe, Daddy. Abby's voice broke through his thoughts that evening as he walked through the apartment door. She barreled into him, her curls bouncing, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Whoa! Tom laughed, scooping her up. What's the rush? It's almost my birthday, she announced, her eyes shining. Can I have a unicorn cake? Tom grinned, setting her down gently. A unicorn cake, huh? That's a tall order. You can do it, Abby said with absolute faith. You're the king. Tom chuckled, ruffling her hair. Guess I better start planning. The Saturday of Abby's birthday dawned bright and cold, sunlight glinting off patches of lingering snow. Tom had spent half the night assembling a pink and purple unicorn cake that looked more like a lopsided horse, but Abby declared it perfect with the kind of sincerity only a 5-year-old could muster. Family and a few close friends crowded the living room, laughter mingling with the scent of frosting and coffee. Tom moved through the chaos with practiced ease, refilling cups, snapping photos, making sure Abby felt like the center of the universe. Tom! Claire's voice called from the kitchen. His sister stood by the counter, her dark eyes dancing with mischief. You've got company. Tom frowned, wiping his hands on a towel as he stepped into the doorway, and froze. She was there. The woman he'd met briefly at a neighborhood holiday mixer in December. The one who'd lingered in his mind like a half-remembered melody. Tall, graceful, with auburn hair that caught the light and a smile that managed to be warm and wry at the same time. Hi, she said, holding out a gift bag adorned with glittery balloons. I hope I'm not crashing. Tom blinked, recovering quickly. Claire invited you? She insisted, the woman said, her tone amused. Said Abby needed more people to spoil her. Tom shot his sister a look, but Claire just grinned and disappeared into the crowd. Come in, Tom said, stepping aside. You're Claire's friend. Neighbor, she corrected. Claire and I share a wall and a love of bad reality TV. Tom smiled faintly. That explains a lot. She laughed, the sound light and easy. I'm Claire's excuse for binge-watching. Tom found himself smiling back, something loosening in his chest. I'm Tom. Claire told me, she said. And this must be the birthday girl. Abby appeared like magic, her eyes wide as she took in the newcomer. Are you a princess? The woman crouched, her smile softening. Not officially, but I do own sparkly shoes. Abby gasped. That counts. Tom chuckled, watching the exchange. There was something about the way this woman, Claire's neighbor, fit into the room without effort, like she belonged there. He didn't know her name yet, and already he felt the faint stirrings of something he hadn't felt in years. Claire didn't tell me your name, Tom said as Abby darted off to show her unicorn cake. Claire likes to keep people guessing, she replied, straightening. It's Claire with an I. Tom blinked. Wait, your name is Claire too? She grinned. Confusing, right? I go by Claire with an I to avoid mix-ups. Tom laughed, shaking his head. That's practical. Or ridiculous, she said, her eyes sparkling. Depends on the day. The party wound down in a blur of wrapping paper and frosting. Tom found himself stealing glances at Claire with an I, noting the way she laughed with Abby, the way she listened when people spoke. There was an ease about her, a warmth that felt like sunlight after a long winter. When she finally slipped on her coat and headed for the door, Tom walked her out, the chill evening air brushing his face. Thanks for coming, he said, his voice quieter now. Thanks for letting me crash, she replied, her smile lingering. Your daughter's amazing. Tom felt something shift inside him, a small, cautious spark. She is. Claire hesitated, then added, maybe we'll see each other again. Tom nodded, his throat tight with words he didn't say. I hope so. That night, after Abby fell asleep clutching a stuffed unicorn, Tom sat on the couch staring at the darkened window. The laughter from the party still echoed faintly in his ears, mingling with the memory of Claire's smile. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a closed door. It felt like a hallway, narrow, uncertain, but leading somewhere, somewhere he hadn't dared imagine. And yet, even as that fragile hope flickered, the unease from work gnawed at him. Jason gone. Mark gone. Patterns forming like cracks in concrete. Tom told himself he could handle it. He had to. For Abby. For the life he was rebuilding piece by piece. But deep down, he knew something was coming. Something that would test every choice he'd made since the night his world shattered. Chapter 4. Systemic changes. By April, the pattern was undeniable. Tom Davenport sat in the glass-walled conference room, his pen poised above a legal pad as Megan Wilson outlined her latest staffing adjustments. Her voice was calm, almost cheerful, as she spoke about fresh perspectives and diversity initiatives. But Tom didn't need corporate jargon to see what was happening. Another man was gone, this time Greg from the Midtown Project, replaced by a woman barely 6 months out of school. Tom kept his expression neutral, his posture relaxed, but inside, unease coiled tighter. He wasn't opposed to diversity. He wasn't opposed to change. But this wasn't balance, it was a purge. And the longer it went on, the more it felt like a countdown. That evening, Tom sat at the kitchen table with Abby, helping her glue cotton balls onto a construction paper lamb for her spring craft project. Glitter clung to his sleeves like stubborn confetti, and the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the quiet. Daddy, Abby said suddenly, her voice curious, why are there only ladies at your work now? Tom froze, the glue bottle in his hand. What do you mean? Abby shrugged, her curls bouncing. You said Mr. Jason used to work with you, and Mr. Mark, and Mr. Greg. But now you only talk about Miss Emily and Miss Sarah and Miss Harper. Tom stared at her, the innocence in her tone cutting deeper than any boardroom critique. You've been paying attention. Abby grinned. I always pay attention. Tom set the glue down, forcing a smile. Sometimes jobs change. People move on. Are you gonna move on? Abby asked, her eyes wide. Tom swallowed hard, his throat tight. I hope not. Abby considered this, then returned to her lamb, humming softly. Tom watched her for a moment, the weight of her question pressing against his ribs. Are you going to move on? He didn't want to. He loved his work. He loved the rhythm of design, the quiet satisfaction of turning ideas into structures that touched the sky. But love didn't pay the bills if someone decided you didn't belong. By May, the tension was no longer subtle. Megan's critiques grew sharper, her tone edged with something Tom couldn't quite name. She questioned details that had never been issues before, minor deviations, stylistic choices, even the phrasing of his emails. It wasn't feedback. It was erosion, chipping away at the foundation of his credibility. Tom adapted because that's what he did. He double-checked every line, every measurement, every comma. He stayed late, sacrificing sleep to ensure perfection. But perfection didn't seem to matter. The goalposts kept moving, and Tom could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. One Thursday afternoon, as Tom reviewed the final renderings for Harborview, Megan appeared at his desk. Her heels clicked against the floor like a metronome, her expression cool. "Tom," she said, holding a folder. "We need to talk." He set down his pen, his pulse steady but slow. "What's on your mind?" Megan placed the folder on his desk, flipping it open to reveal a series of annotated drawings. Red marks slashed across the pages like wounds. "These elevations," she said, tapping the paper, "are uninspired. Safe. I asked for bold." Tom kept his voice even. "The client approved these designs. The client doesn't know what they want until we show them," Megan replied, her tone clipped. "You've been coasting, Tom. Playing it safe." Tom felt the words land like stones. Coasting. Playing it safe. If only she knew how hard he fought every day to keep the pieces together. For Abby. For the fragile life he'd rebuilt from ashes. But he didn't say that. He didn't say anything. Megan straightened, her gaze sharp. "I expect revisions by Monday." Tom nodded once, his jaw tight. "Understood." She walked away without another word, leaving the scent of her perfume and the echo of her critique hanging in the air. That night, Tom sat on the couch staring at the muted glow of the television while Abby slept in her room. The apartment felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplified every thought. He thought about the men who had vanished from the team one by one. He thought about Megan's words, coasting, playing it safe. He thought about the box of personal items in his desk drawer, wondering if he should start packing. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the silence. A text from Claire with an eye. "Hey, just checking in. How's the birthday unicorn holding up?" Tom stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. "Still standing. Unlike me some days." Her reply came quickly. "Sounds like you need coffee. Or something stronger." Tom hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Coffee sounds good. Tomorrow, my treat." Tom stared at the message, the weight in his chest easing just a fraction. Tomorrow. A simple word. A small promise. And for the first time in weeks, it felt like a lifeline. Friday afternoon found Tom at a corner cafe, the scent of roasted beans wrapping around him like a blanket. Claire with an eye was already there, her auburn hair catching the sunlight streaming through the window. She waved him over, her smile warm. "You look like you wrestled a dragon," she said as he slid into the seat across from her. Tom chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Something like that." "Work?" she guessed. "Work," he confirmed. She tilted her head, studying him. "You don't talk about it much." Tom shrugged. "Not much to say." "Try me," she said, her tone gentle but firm. Tom hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "It's complicated." Claire smiled faintly. "Everything worth doing usually is." Tom looked at her, really looked at her. The steady gaze, the quiet strength in her posture, and felt something shift. He didn't spill everything, not yet. But he let a few words slip, enough to lighten the load. "Things are changing," he said softly. "And not in ways I expected." Claire nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Change isn't always bad." "No," Tom agreed. "But sometimes it feels like a storm you didn't see coming." She smiled, her eyes warm. "Then maybe you need an umbrella." Tom laughed, the sound surprising him. "Maybe I do." When he returned to the office on Monday, the storm was waiting. Megan called a team meeting, her tone brisk as she outlined strategic adjustments. 2 more men were gone. Quiet exits, no explanations. Their seats filled by women whose resumes read like fresh ink. Tom listened, his stomach sinking, the writing on the wall growing bolder with every word. He knew then, with a clarity that felt like ice, he was next. Chapter 5. The breaking point. The meeting room was too bright, too quiet, the kind of sterile space where ambition thrived and empathy withered. Tom Davenport sat at the long table, his notebook open, his pen resting against the margin. Around him, the team murmured in subdued tones, waiting for Megan Wilson to begin. She entered like a gust of cold air, heels clicking, blazer sharp, expression carved from steel. Without preamble, she launched into her critique of the Harborview revisions Tom had submitted over the weekend. "These elevations," Megan said, her voice slicing through the silence, "are a disappointment." Tom felt the words land like blows, but he kept his face neutral. He'd spent 48 hours refining those designs, stripping them down to their bones. rebuilding them with precision. He knew they were solid. He knew they met the client's brief. But none of that mattered now. They lack vision, Megan continued, flipping through the pages with a flick of her manicured fingers. Safe. Predictable. Exactly what I told you not to deliver. Tom's jaw tightened. He could feel the eyes of his team on him. Some sympathetic, some wary, all silent. He wanted to defend the work, to explain the constraints, the client's insistence on functionality over flair. But he didn't. He'd learned that logic was useless against someone who had already decided you were wrong. Megan closed the folder with a snap. Frankly, Tom, I expected better. The words hung in the air like smoke. Tom stared at his notebook, the neat lines blurring. Expected better. As if 14 years of loyalty, of deadlines met and crises averted, meant nothing. As if the nights he'd spent in this office while Abby slept alone at home were invisible. Something inside him shifted. Quiet, seismic. He felt it in his bones, in the steady rhythm of his pulse. Enough. Tom stood slowly, the chair legs scraping against the polished floor. The sound drew every eye in the room. Tom. Megan's voice sharpened. Where are you going? He closed his notebook with deliberate care, sliding the pen into the spiral. I think we're done here. Megan blinked, her expression hardening. Excuse me? Tom met her gaze, calm as a summer breeze. I said we're done. He turned and walked out, her voice chasing him down the hall like a siren. Tom, come back here. This meeting isn't over. He didn't look back. He didn't break stride. He moved through the office with the quiet certainty of a man who had made his choice. At his desk, he pulled the small box from the bottom drawer, the one he'd never wanted to use, and began placing his few personal items inside. A photo of Abby in her unicorn pajamas, a coffee mug with a chipped handle, a mechanical pencil worn smooth from years of use. When the box was full, he lifted it in one hand and headed for Jackson Wilson's office. Jackson was elbows deep in paperwork when Tom stepped through the door. The older man looked up, his smile automatic, until his gaze fell on the box in Tom's hands. The smile faded like sunlight behind clouds. Tom, Jackson said slowly, rising from his chair. What's going on? Tom set the box on the edge of the desk, his voice steady. I wanted to thank you. Jackson frowned. Thank me? For what? For taking a chance on me when I was fresh out of college, Tom said. For standing by me when I lost my wife. For making this place feel like more than a job. Jackson's throat worked, his eyes narrowing. Tom, what are you? I can't stay, Tom said quietly. Not anymore. The words hit the air like a hammer. Jackson stared at him, stunned. What do you mean you can't stay? You're one of the best architects I've ever had. Tom shook his head. I don't feel safe here. Jackson blinked, as if the concept were foreign. Safe? Tom, this is 5 months, Tom said, his tone calm but firm. That's how long it's been since Megan started replacing every man on my team. Jason, Mark, Greg, all gone, all replaced by women. And now she's coming for me. Jackson's face darkened, his jaw tightening. That's not. She's building a case, Tom continued, his voice low, criticizing details that were never issues before, undermining my work. Today, she called my designs a disappointment in front of the entire team. Jackson opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the door slammed open. Megan stormed in like a thunderclap, her eyes blazing. Tom, what the hell do you think you're doing? Tom didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned to her, his expression calm. Leaving. You can't just walk out. Megan snapped. You have responsibilities? My responsibility, Tom said, his tone like steel wrapped in velvet, is to my daughter, to her safety, to her future. And I won't risk either by staying in a place where I'm being targeted because I'm a man. Megan's mouth fell open, shock flashing across her face before morphing into fury. That's absurd. Tom ignored her. He looked at Jackson, his voice softening. I appreciate everything you've done for me, truly, but I can't fight this. I won't. He picked up the box, turned and walked out, quiet as a calm summer breeze. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving silence in its wake. Jackson stared at it for a long moment, his mind struggling to catch up to the catastrophe that had just unfolded. When he finally looked at Megan, she was standing with her arms crossed, her expression smug. Good riddance, she said coolly. We don't need another entitled man holding us back. Jackson froze. For the first time in his life, he had no idea who his daughter was. He rose slowly, walked to the window, and spoke without turning. His voice was calm, too calm. Do you have any idea what you've done, Megan? She scoffed. I've done what's best for the company. Jackson turned then, his gaze like a blade. Is what Tom said true? About replacing the men on his team. Megan lifted her chin. He's twisting the facts. Every change was documented properly. Jackson studied her face, searching for the daughter he thought he knew. Is that so? Yes, Megan said, her tone sharp. I'm building a stronger team, a better team. Jackson didn't speak. He moved to his desk, sat down and opened his computer. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up Megan's company email and messaging account. He didn't want to believe it. He prayed he wouldn't find anything. But the truth stared back at him in black and white. Emails, text messages, threads of conversation between Megan and several women across the company, bragging about how, by the time her father handed her the reins, Wilson and Company would be a female-only firm. Messages dating back to before she even started. Plans, strategies, and in the last few weeks, detailed steps for making Tom look incompetent. Jackson's breath left him in a slow, lethal exhale. When he spoke, his voice was a roar, a sound Megan had never heard in her life. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Megan flinched, stunned into silence. Jackson rose, his face carved from fury and grief. Tom wasn't just an architect. He was the lead designer for every successful contract we've had in the last 6 years. He turned down offers that paid twice what I could give him because he believed in loyalty. And you, his voice cracked like thunder. You destroyed that. Megan tried to speak, but Jackson cut her off with a raised hand. "I love you," he said, his voice low and lethal. "But we might not recover from this." He stepped closer, his eyes burning. "You're fired. Now get out of my company before I have to file for bankruptcy." Megan stared at him, her world tilting. "You can't." "I just did," Jackson said coldly. "Get out." For the first time in her life, Megan realized her father wasn't a man who yelled. He was a man who ended things, and this was the end. Chapter 6. Fallout. Jackson Wilson sat alone in his office, the silence pressing against him like a weight. The door Megan had slammed on her way out still vibrated faintly in his memory, a sharp echo of a day that had unraveled everything he thought he knew. He stared at the computer screen, the damning emails glowing like embers. Words he couldn't unsee, plans he couldn't forgive. His daughter, his own flesh and blood, had turned his company into a battlefield for ideology. And in the process, he had lost the one man he trusted most. Tom Davenport. Jackson rubbed his temples, the ache behind his eyes pulsing like a drum. He thought of Tom's quiet competence, his steady presence, the way he never missed a deadline, never complained, never asked for more than what was fair. He thought of the nights Tom had stayed late, the sacrifices he'd made, the loyalty that had kept him here when other firms dangled offers like candy. And now he was gone. Jackson rose slowly, moving to the window. The city stretched beyond the glass, its skyline etched against a bruised sky. He had built this company from nothing, brick by brick, blueprint by blueprint. And in one reckless sweep, Megan had shattered the foundation. He closed his eyes, his voice a whisper in the empty room. "God help me fix this." Tom drove through the city with the box of his belongings on the passenger seat, the hum of the engine filling the silence. The streets blurred past in shades of gray and gold, but he barely saw them. His mind was a storm, memories colliding with questions, fear tangling with relief. He had done it. He had walked away. The decision felt both terrifying and inevitable, like stepping off a ledge and trusting the air to catch you. He thought of Abby, her laughter ringing in his ears like a bell. He thought of the promise he had made to himself the night his wife died, that he would keep their daughter safe no matter what. Today he had kept that promise. But what now? Tom gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He had savings, enough to float for a while. He had skills, 14 years of experience, a portfolio that spoke for itself. But he also had a 5-year-old who needed stability, and the thought of uprooting her life again made his chest ache. He signaled, turning onto the highway that led toward home. Not just the apartment, the real home. The one he had left behind years ago. In a town where the streets were lined with maple trees, and the air smelled like cut grass in summer. His parents were still there, his sister too. They had offered 100 times to help, to make space for him and Abby. Maybe it was time to accept. The idea settled in his mind like a seed, fragile but real. He could move back, start fresh, find work, maybe not at the level he was used to, but enough to keep them afloat. Enough to breathe. Tom exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. It wasn't a plan yet, but it was a direction. And for now, that was enough. When he pulled into the apartment parking lot, the sky was streaked with violet, the first stars pricking through the dusk. He carried the box upstairs, each step heavy with the weight of endings and beginnings. Abby was waiting at the door, her curls haloed by the warm glow of the lamp behind her. She flung her arms around his waist, her voice bright. "Daddy, you're home." Tom crouched, holding her close, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and crayons. "I'm home," he said softly. She pulled back, her eyes wide. "Why do you look sad?" Tom smiled faintly, brushing a curl from her forehead. "Just a long day." Abby tilted her head, studying him with the solemn wisdom only children possess. "Did the boss lady make you mad?" Tom hesitated, then shook his head. "Not mad, just ready for something new." Abby considered this, then grinned. "Like a unicorn cake?" Tom laughed, the sound breaking through the heaviness. "Something like that." Later, after Abby was asleep, Tom sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet. He wrote 2 words at the top of the page. Next steps. Underneath, he listed what he knew. Call mom and dad. Talk to Claire, his sister. Research local firms back home. Update portfolio. A budget for moving expenses. The list looked small, almost laughably simple compared to the storm in his head. But it was a start, and starts mattered. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. A text from Claire with an eye. Hey, you okay? Tom stared at the screen, his chest tightening. He typed back slowly. I quit today. Her reply came almost instantly. Wow, that's big. How do you feel? Tom stared at the words, searching for an answer. Finally, he typed, scared, relieved. Both. Makes sense, she wrote. Want company or space? Tom hesitated, then smiled faintly. Company sounds good. Give me 20 minutes, she replied. Tom set the phone down, his pulse steadying. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, he wouldn't face the quiet alone. 20 minutes later, Claire with an eye was sitting across from him at the kitchen table. Her auburn hair pulled into a loose knot, her eyes warm. So, she said, wrapping her hands around a mug of tea. You quit. Tom nodded, his voice low. I couldn't stay. She studied him for a moment, then smiled softly. Good for you. Tom blinked. Good for me. Yeah, she said, her tone gentle but firm. You chose peace over chaos. That's brave. Tom let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It doesn't feel brave. It will, she said. Once the dust settles. He looked at her, really looked at her. The steady gaze, the quiet strength, and felt something shift. Not a storm, not a spark. Just a warmth, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Thanks, he said softly. She smiled, her eyes crinkling. Anytime. They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea, the weight of the day easing with every quiet moment. Outside, the city hummed, oblivious to the small, fragile hope blooming in a kitchen where endings had given way to beginnings. Chapter 7. Back to roots. The decision was made before Tom Davenport even realized he'd made it. It wasn't a single moment, not a dramatic epiphany. It was a quiet accumulation of truths. Abby needed stability. He needed peace. And both were waiting in the town he had left behind years ago, where maple trees lined the streets and life moved at a pace that didn't crush the soul. By the end of the week, Tom had packed their lives into boxes. Books, toys, the unicorn cake pan Abby refused to part with. The apartment looked hollow, stripped of the laughter and late-night coloring sessions that had filled it. Tom stood in the doorway for a long moment, his hand resting on the frame, before turning away. The drive was long but familiar, the highway stretching like a ribbon through fields and forests. Abby chattered from the back seat, her voice bright with excitement. Are we going to see Grandma and Grandpa? She asked for the 5th time. Yes, Tom said, smiling faintly. And Aunt Claire. Will they have cookies? Probably. Will they have unicorn cookies? Tom chuckled. That might be pushing it. Abby gasped. We can teach them. Tom laughed, the sound easing the tightness in his chest. For the first time in weeks, the horizon didn't feel like a wall. Felt like a door. They arrived just as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Tom pulled into the gravel driveway of his parents' house, a sprawling farmhouse with a wraparound porch and a yard that smelled like summer even in spring. The front door flew open before he could cut the engine. His mother barreled down the steps, her arms outstretched, her gray-streaked hair escaping its bun. Tom! She cried, pulling him into a hug that nearly cracked his ribs. Oh, honey, you're home. Tom hugged her back, his throat tight. Hi, Mom. She pulled away, her eyes shining as she turned to Abby. And look at you. My goodness, you've grown. Abby squealed as her grandmother scooped her up, spinning her in a circle. Tom's father appeared in the doorway, his smile quiet but warm, and Claire, his sister, was right behind him, her grin wide. About time you came to your senses, Claire teased, hugging him hard. City life never suited you. Tom chuckled, the sound rough with emotion. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Always, she said, her eyes softening. We've got your room ready. Abby's too. Tom glanced at his daughter, who was already chattering about unicorn cookies and glitter crafts. The sight made something inside him unclench, a knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Home. It wasn't just a place. It was this. Warmth, laughter, belonging. That night, after Abby fell asleep in a bed piled high with stuffed animals, Tom sat on the porch with Claire, the cool air brushing his face. Fireflies winked in the yard, and the distant hum of crickets filled the quiet. So, Claire said, handing him a mug of coffee, you really quit. Tom nodded, staring at the dark horizon. I couldn't stay. Claire studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. You look lighter. Tom let out a breath. I feel lighter, scared, but lighter. Claire nudged his shoulder. You'll figure it out. You always do. Tom smiled, his gaze drifting to the stars. I hope so. The next morning, Tom sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, Abby coloring beside him. He pulled up job listings, scanning the options. Smaller firms, residential projects, Nothing like the scale he was used to, but enough to keep them afloat. He updated his portfolio, his fingers moving with practiced precision. Each design told a story. A skyscraper that kissed the clouds, a waterfront complex that shimmered like glass. He wondered if any of it mattered here, in a town where ambition was measured in square footage and charm. "Daddy," Abby said suddenly, holding up a picture of a house with a rainbow roof. "Can we live here?" Tom smiled. "That's beautiful. It's magic," she said solemnly. "Like us." Tom stared at the drawing, the crooked lines and bright colors, and felt something stir. A reminder of why he did this. Not for awards. Not for prestige. For this. For the dream of building something that felt like home. By afternoon, he had sent out 3 applications and bookmarked 2 more. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And starts mattered. When his phone buzzed, he expected a spam call. Instead, it was Claire with an eye. "How's the great escape going?" Tom smiled, typing back. "We made it. Abby's already planning unicorn cookies with my mom." Her reply came quickly. "Sounds like paradise. How's the job hunt?" "Slow," Tom admitted. "But I'll figure it out." "You will," she wrote. "And if you need a cheerleader, I'm only a call away." Tom stared at the screen, his chest tightening in a way that wasn't unpleasant. He typed back, "Thanks. That means more than you know." "Anytime," she replied. "Seriously, anytime." Tom set the phone down, his pulse steadying. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight he had family. He had Abby. He had hope. And maybe, just maybe, he had something else too. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the porch lights flickered on, Tom sat with Abby on the swing, her head resting against his shoulder. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice drowsy. "Are we gonna stay here forever?" Tom kissed the top of her head, his voice soft. "As long as you want." Abby smiled, her eyes closing. "I want forever." Tom held her close, staring at the stars. Forever. It wasn't a promise he could make. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, it felt possible. Chapter 8. A chance encounter. Tom Davenport wasn't expecting to see her again. Not here. Not now. Not when his mind was tangled in job applications and budget spreadsheets. But life had a way of tossing surprises like pebbles into still water, sending ripples through the calm he was trying so hard to maintain. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon at the local hardware store. Tom had promised Abby they'd build a birdhouse, a project to keep her entertained while he scoured job boards. He stood in the aisle, scanning rows of nails and paint, when a familiar voice floated over the hum of fluorescent lights. "Tom." He turned, and there she was, Claire with an eye. Her auburn hair was pulled into a loose braid, a smudge of sawdust on her cheek like an accidental brushstroke. She wore jeans and a faded sweatshirt, and somehow looked more radiant than she had in the city cafe weeks ago. "Claire," Tom said. His voice warmed despite the jolt in his chest. "What are you doing here?" She grinned, holding up a pack of sandpaper. "Trying to keep my coffee table from looking like a crime scene." "You?" "Birdhouse," Tom replied, gesturing to the cart filled with wood panels and paint. "Abby's idea." Claire's smile widened. "Smart kid. She gets it from her mother?" Tom said softly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Claire's expression softened, her eyes steady. "And from you." Tom swallowed, the quiet weight of her gaze pressing against something tender inside him. He cleared his throat, forcing a smile. "You live around here?" "About 10 minutes away," she said. "Moved back last year. Needed a slower pace." Tom chuckled. "Seems to be a theme." Claire tilted her head, her eyes dancing. "So you're officially a local again?" "Working on it," Tom said. "Still figuring out the job situation." "You'll land on your feet," she said, her tone certain. "People like you always do." Tom blinked. "People like me?" "Decent," she said simply. "Steady. The kind who doesn't quit when things get hard." Tom stared at her, the words sinking deep. He wanted to tell her how wrong she was, how quitting had felt like the only option. But he didn't. Instead, he smiled faintly. "Thanks." Claire shrugged, her grin returning. "Just calling it like I see it." Abby appeared then, barreling down the aisle with a fistful of paintbrushes. "Daddy, look, pink." Tom laughed, catching her before she collided with the cart. "Slow down, kiddo." Abby froze when she saw Claire, her eyes wide. "Princess lady." Claire laughed, crouching to Abby's level. "Still not officially a princess," she said. "But I do own sparkly shoes." Abby gasped. "You came back." Claire smiled. "Looks like I did." Abby tilted her head, her curls bouncing. "Are you gonna help us make the birdhouse?" Tom opened his mouth to protest, but Claire beat him to it. "If you need an extra pair of hands." Abby squealed, clapping her paint-stained fingers. "Yes." "Daddy, say yes." Tom chuckled, shaking his head. "You're relentless." Abby grinned. "I learned from you." Tom laughed, the sound easing something tight in his chest. "Fine. Yes." Claire's eyes sparkled. "Guess I'm building a birdhouse." They met later that afternoon at Tom's parents' farmhouse, the porch bathed in golden light. Claire arrived with a toolbox and a smile that made Tom's pulse trip over itself. "Hope you don't mind." she said, lifting the box. I take birdhouses seriously. Tom grinned. Good. Abby's expecting a palace. Abby bounded onto the porch, her curls flying. Princess lady, come see my paint. Claire laughed, following her inside. Tom trailed behind, watching the easy way she fit into the space, as if she belonged there, as if she'd always belonged. The project turned into a comedy of errors. Abby insisted on pink walls and glitter shingles. Tom tried to measure twice and cut once, but Claire kept distracting him with jokes about avian real estate trends. At one point, the hammer slipped, and Tom muttered a curse that made Abby giggle like a conspirator. Daddy said a bad word, she whispered to Claire, her eyes wide with delight. Claire grinned. Don't worry, I'll keep his secret. Tom shot her a look, but her laughter was contagious, and soon he was laughing too, real laughter, the kind that shook loose the shadows clinging to his ribs. By the time the sun dipped low, the birdhouse was finished, or something resembling finished. It leaned slightly to the left, glitter clung to every surface, and the roof looked like a unicorn had exploded. Abby declared it perfect, and danced around the porch like a tiny queen. Tom watched her, his chest aching with a sweetness he hadn't felt in years. Then his gaze drifted to Claire, who was wiping paint from her hands, her smile soft. Thanks, he said quietly. She looked up. For what? For this, Tom said, gesturing to the chaos, the birdhouse, the laughter, the warmth. For making today good. Claire's eyes held his, steady and bright. You deserve good days, Tom. The words landed like a bomb, soothing something raw inside him. He wanted to say more, to tell her how much this meant, how much she meant, but Abby barreled into him then, demanding a bedtime story, and the moment slipped away like smoke. Later, after Abby was asleep and the house was quiet, Tom walked Claire to her car. The night air was cool, the stars scattered like diamonds across the dark. Thanks again, he said, his voice low. Claire smiled, her breath misting in the chill. Anytime. Tom hesitated, his hands shoved into his pockets. You really mean that? Her gaze softened. I do. Tom nodded, his throat tight. Then maybe, we could do this again. Claire's smile widened, slow and sure. I'd like that. Tom felt something bloom inside him, a fragile, reckless hope. He watched her drive away, the taillights glowing like embers, and for the first time in a long time, tomorrow didn't feel like a storm, felt like a sunrise. Chapter 9. Sparks fly. Spring settled over the town like a soft quilt, the air scented with lilacs and fresh-cut grass. Tom Davenport found himself smiling more these days. Small, unguarded smiles that crept in when he least expected them. Like now, as he watched Abby race across the yard with Claire with an eye trailing behind, both of them laughing like conspirators. The birdhouse they built together hung crookedly from a maple branch, glitter catching the sunlight like tiny stars. Abby insisted the birds loved it because it was fancy, and Tom hadn't had the heart to argue. He was too busy watching Claire kneel in the grass, her auburn hair spilling over her shoulder as she helped Abby arrange a row of wildflowers in a mason jar. Daddy, Abby called, waving a daisy like a victory flag. Look what we made. Tom grinned, walking over. That's beautiful. Abby beamed. Claire says flowers make houses happy. Tom glanced at Claire, his smile tugging wider. Does that work on birdhouses too? Claire laughed, her eyes crinkling. Only if the birds appreciate interior design. Tom chuckled, the sound warm and easy. Guess we'll find out. Later, they sat on the porch sipping lemonade, the afternoon sun painting everything in gold. Abby sprawled on the swing, humming to herself as she braided strands of grass. Tom leaned against the railing, his gaze drifting to Claire. You're good with her, he said quietly. Claire looked up, her expression soft. She's easy to love. Tom swallowed, the words landing deeper than she probably intended. She is. Claire studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. So are you. Tom blinked, caught off guard. Me? She shrugged, her tone light but her eyes steady. You're a good man, Tom. That's rare. Tom stared at her, the hum of crickets filling the silence. He wanted to tell her how wrong she was, how he felt anything but good most days, how the weight of failure pressed against his ribs like stone. But he didn't. Instead, he smiled, small and uncertain. Thanks. Claire's gaze lingered, warm and unwavering. You don't have to thank me for telling the truth. Over the next few weeks, Claire became a fixture in their lives, not by design, but by the quiet rhythm of shared moments. Coffee on the porch, walks to the park, trips to the farmer's market where Abby insisted on buying strawberries for the birds. Tom found himself looking forward to those moments more than he wanted to admit. He liked the way Claire laughed, full and unself-conscious. He liked the way she listened, really listened, as if his words mattered. He liked the way she made Abby feel like the center of the universe without trying. And he liked the way she made him feel alive. Not the reckless, headlong rush of youth, but something steadier, something that felt like home. One Saturday, they drove to the lake for a picnic. Abby chattered the whole way, her voice a bright ribbon weaving through the hum of the engine. Daddy, can we swim? Not today, Tom said, smiling. It's still too cold. Can we build a sandcastle? Absolutely. Can Claire help? Tom glanced at Claire, who grinned. I make excellent sandcastles. Abby squealed. Best day ever. Tom laughed, his chest aching with a sweetness he hadn't felt in years. The lake shimmered under a sky so blue it looked painted. They spread a blanket on the sand, unpacked sandwiches and lemonade, and watched Abby dart back and forth like a sunbeam. She's happy? Claire said softly, her gaze following the little girl. Tom nodded, his throat tight. That's all I want. Claire looked at him, her eyes steady. And what about you? Tom blinked. Me? Yes, she said, her voice gentle. What do you want, Tom? The question hung in the air, simple and seismic. Tom stared at the water, the sunlight dancing on its surface. He wanted to say he didn't know. He wanted to say he couldn't think beyond Abby, beyond survival. But the truth pressed against his ribs, quiet and insistent. I want. He hesitated, then met her gaze. I want to feel like I'm not just holding things together. Claire's eyes softened. You deserve more than that. Tom swallowed hard. Maybe. Not maybe, she said, her tone firm. Definitely. Tom stared at her, the sunlight catching in her hair, and felt something shift, a slow, steady pull that felt like gravity. He wanted to reach for her, to close the space between them. But Abby barreled into them then, demanding help with her sandcastle, and the moment slipped away like a tide. That night, after Abby was asleep and the house was quiet, Tom sat on the porch staring at the stars. His phone buzzed, a text from Claire. Thanks for today. It was good. Tom smiled, his fingers moving before he could think. It was more than good. Her reply came quickly. More than good sounds promising. Tom stared at the words, his pulse quickening. He typed back. It feels like something I didn't know I needed. There was a pause, then, me too. Tom set the phone down, his heart thudding. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, the stars didn't look so far away. Chapter 10. Complications. The first sign of trouble came on a Wednesday morning, tucked between a stack of resumes and a half-empty coffee cup. Tom Davenport sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through job listings, when an email pinged into his inbox. Subject: Opportunity Senior Design Lead from Harrington and Company. Architecture. Tom clicked it open, his pulse quickening as he scanned the message. Harrington and Company, a prestigious firm in the city, known for its cutting-edge projects and sky-high salaries. They had seen his portfolio online, were impressed by his work, and wanted to schedule an interview. The position came with a salary that made his breath catch, benefits that glittered like gold, and a promise of creative freedom he hadn't tasted in years. Tom stared at the screen, the words blurring. This was everything he had once wanted, before life had stripped ambition down to survival. Before Abby became the axis his world spun on. Before the idea of uprooting her life felt like betrayal. He closed the laptop slowly, his chest tight. He couldn't ignore this, but he couldn't embrace it either. Not yet. That afternoon, Claire with an eye showed up with a basket of muffins and a smile that made Tom's pulse stumble. Peace offering, she said, setting the basket on the counter. For stealing your hammer last week. Tom chuckled, leaning against the doorway. You returned it. Still felt guilty, she said, her eyes dancing. So, muffins. Tom grinned, the heaviness in his chest easing just a fraction. You didn't have to. I wanted to, she said softly. Tom swallowed, the quiet weight of her words pressing against something tender inside him. He wanted to tell her about the email, about the storm brewing in his head. But Abby barreled into the kitchen then, demanding a muffin and a story, and the moment slipped away like smoke. They spent the afternoon in the yard, laughter mingling with birdsong. Abby braided dandelions into Claire's hair, declaring her queen of spring, while Tom watched from the porch, his heart caught between two worlds, the one he had built here, fragile and warm, and the one glittering on the horizon like a mirage. Later, after Abby was tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Tom walked Claire to her car. The night air was cool, the stars scattered like diamonds across the dark. Thanks for today, he said, his voice low. Claire smiled, her breath misting in the chill. Anytime. Tom hesitated, his hands shoved into his pockets. Claire, there's something I need to tell you. Her gaze softened. Okay. Tom exhaled slowly. I got an email today, from a firm in the city. They want me to interview. Claire blinked, her expression unreadable. That's big. Yeah, Tom said, his voice rough. It's a great opportunity. Better pay, bigger projects. And? She asked gently. Tom stared at the gravel, his throat tight. And it would mean leaving, moving back. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Claire looked at him, her eyes steady. Do you want that? Tom swallowed hard. I don't know. Claire nodded slowly, her face calm but her voice quiet. Then figure it out. For you. For Abby. Tom stared at her, the ache in his chest deepening. What if figuring it out means losing this? Her eyes held his, unwavering. Then maybe it wasn't yours to keep. The words landed like stones, sharp and true. Tom wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong. That this her, Abby, the laughter spilling across the porch, felt more real than anything he'd ever known. But the truth pressed against his ribs, relentless. He didn't know what to choose. He didn't know how. Claire smiled faintly, her breath catching in the cool air. "Good night, Tom." He watched her drive away, the taillights glowing like embers, and felt the horizon tilt. The next day, Tom sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, the email glaring like a dare. Abby colored beside him, humming softly, oblivious to the storm brewing in her father's chest. "Daddy," she said suddenly, holding up a picture of a house with a rainbow roof. "Can we live here forever?" Tom stared at the drawing, the crooked lines and bright colors, and felt something crack. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise her forever. But forever wasn't a word he could hold right now. Not when the ground beneath him felt like shifting sand. He closed the laptop slowly, his decision still a shadow. For now, he would wait. For now, he would breathe. For now, he would hold on to the fragile, glittering hope that tomorrow might bring clarity. Chapter 11. The turning point. The storm inside Tom Davenport had been brewing for days. Quiet, relentless, like rain pressing against a window pane. The job offer sat in his inbox like a ticking clock, each passing hour amplifying the question he couldn't answer. "What do you want, Tom?" He told himself he was waiting for clarity. But clarity didn't come. Not in the hum of the refrigerator at midnight. Not in the rustle of Abby's laughter as she played in the yard. Not even in the quiet moments when Claire's smile lingered like sunlight on his skin. It came from Abby because it always did. It was Saturday morning, and the kitchen smelled like pancakes and syrup. Abby sat at the table, swinging her legs, her curls haloed by the golden light streaming through the window. Tom flipped a pancake onto her plate, and she grinned like he'd just handed her the moon. "Daddy," she said between bites, "are we gonna stay here forever?" Tom froze, the spatula hovering midair. "What do you mean?" Abby shrugged, her voice matter-of-fact. "I like it here. Grandma makes cookies. Aunt Claire lets me paint. And Claire with an eye makes everything fun." Tom swallowed hard, his chest tightening. "You like Claire?" Abby nodded vigorously. "She's my favorite. Except you." Tom smiled faintly, setting the spatula down. "That's good to know." Abby tilted her head, studying him with solemn eyes. "Do you like her?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through every corner of his mind. Tom stared at his daughter, her innocence cutting through the fog like a blade. "Yes," he said softly. "I like her." Abby grinned, syrup glistening on her chin. "Then you should tell her." Tom laughed, the sound rough with emotion. "It's not that simple." Abby frowned. "Why not?" Tom hesitated, then sighed. "Because sometimes grown-ups make things complicated." Abby considered this, then shrugged. "Then be a kid." Tom stared at her, the words sinking deep. Then be a kid. Simple. True. And maybe, just maybe, the answer he'd been searching for. That afternoon, Tom found himself driving to Claire's house, Abby humming in the back seat like a soundtrack to his resolve. He didn't have a script. He didn't have a plan. He just had the truth and the fragile hope that it might be enough. Claire lived in a small cottage tucked behind a row of lilacs, the porch draped in ivy like a green curtain. She was outside when they arrived, kneeling in the garden with dirt on her hands and sunlight in her hair. When she looked up and saw him, her smile was warm but cautious. "Hey," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "Wasn't expecting company." Tom swallowed, his pulse thudding. "Hope you don't mind." "Never," she said softly. Abby barreled out of the car, waving a fistful of dandelions. "Claire, look what I found." Claire laughed, crouching to accept the offering. "Beautiful. Thank you." Tom watched them, his chest aching with a sweetness that felt almost unbearable. Then Claire straightened, her gaze meeting his, and the air shifted, quiet, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Tom," she said gently, "what's going on?" He exhaled slowly, his hands shoved into his pockets. "I need to tell you something." Claire nodded, her eyes steady. "Okay." Tom glanced at Abby, who was now arranging dandelions in a chipped mug like a florist with a mission. He smiled faintly, then looked back at Claire. "I got a job offer," he said, his voice low. "In the city. Big firm. Big salary." Claire's expression didn't change, but her breath caught almost imperceptibly. "And," Tom swallowed hard, "and I don't want it." Her brows lifted, surprise flickering across her face. "You don't." Tom shook his head, the truth spilling out like water breaking through a dam. "I thought I did. I thought that's what I was supposed to want. But every time I picture leaving this, leaving Abby's laughter in this yard, leaving you, it feels wrong." Claire stared at him, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. "Tom." He stepped closer, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know what the future looks like. I don't have all the answers. But I know this, I want to stay. I want to build something here. With Abby. With you." Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Claire's eyes shimmered, her lips parting like she was searching for words that didn't exist. Then Abby barreled into them, clutching the mug of dandelions like a trophy. "Look." It's perfect. Tom laughed, the sound breaking through the tension like sunlight through clouds. He crouched, kissing the top of her head, then looked up at Claire. Her smile was soft now, trembling at the edges. You're sure? Tom nodded, his voice steady. I've never been more sure. Claire exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping her lips. Then I guess we're both staying. Tom blinked. Both. She smiled, her eyes bright. I got an offer too. Last week. Consulting job in Chicago. Tom's chest tightened. And I turned it down, she said simply, because every time I pictured leaving, it felt wrong. Tom stared at her, the weight of her words sinking deep. Then he laughed, a low, incredulous sound that felt like release. Guess we're both terrible at ambition. Claire grinned, her eyes crinkling. Or maybe we're just good at choosing what matters. Tom stepped closer, the space between them collapsing like a bridge folding into itself. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers, and felt the spark. Quiet, steady, undeniable. Claire, he said softly. She looked up, her breath catching. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a rush, wasn't a blaze. It was something deeper. Something that felt like roots sinking into earth, like sunlight breaking through clouds, like home. When they pulled apart, Abby was staring at them with wide eyes and a grin that could light the world. Does this mean Claire's gonna live with us? She asked, her voice bright. Tom laughed, his forehead resting against Claire's. One step at a time, kiddo. Abby shrugged, unconvinced. I think it means yes. Claire laughed, the sound spilling into the golden air, and Tom held her hand like a promise. For the first time in years, the horizon didn't feel like a storm. Felt like forever. Chapter 12. Love in full bloom. The days after that kiss unfolded like petals. Slow, steady, inevitable. Tom Davenport woke each morning with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. A quiet joy that hummed beneath the ordinary rhythms of life. Coffee on the porch. Abby's laughter spilling through the house. Claire's smile lingering like sunlight on his skin. It wasn't perfect. Life never was, but it felt real. Solid. Like roots sinking deep into earth. Tom committed to his choice the following Monday. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, the Harrington and Company email glaring like a neon sign. Abby colored beside him, humming softly, oblivious to the weight of the moment. He clicked reply, his fingers steady. Thank you for the opportunity. After careful consideration, I've decided to decline. Wishing you continued success. He hit send, the decision leaving his chest like a breath he'd been holding for weeks. No fanfare, no fireworks, just quiet certainty. Daddy, Abby said suddenly, holding up a picture of a house with a rainbow roof. Can we live here forever? Tom smiled, his throat tight. That's the plan. Abby grinned, syrup from breakfast still glistening on her chin. Good. Claire likes rainbows. Tom laughed, ruffling her curls. She does. That evening, he drove to Claire's cottage, the air warm with the promise of summer. She was on the porch when he arrived, her auburn hair catching the last rays of sunlight, her smile soft but questioning. You look like a man with news, she said, leaning against the railing. Tom climbed the steps, his pulse steady now. I turned it down. Her brows lifted. The job? He nodded. I don't want the city. I don't want skyscrapers and deadlines and nights away from Abby. I want this. His voice softened. I want you. Claire stared at him, her breath catching, her eyes shimmering like glass. Tom. He stepped closer, his hands finding hers, his voice rough with emotion. I don't know what the future looks like, but I know I want to build it here, with Abby, with you. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Then Claire laughed, a shaky, incredulous sound that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Do you have any idea how long I've wanted to hear that? She whispered. Tom smiled, his forehead resting against hers. Probably as long as I've wanted to say it. Her laughter melted into a sigh, and then she kissed him, soft, sure, like a promise. They spent the evening on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. Claire told him about her past, the consulting job that had drained her soul, the relationship that had left her wary of promises. Tom listened, his heart aching for the weight she had carried alone. I thought ambition was everything, she said quietly, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. Turns out it was just noise. Tom nodded, his voice low. I thought the same, until the noise stopped. Claire looked at him, her eyes steady. And now? Tom smiled faintly. Now I hear what matters. Her breath caught, her lips curving into a smile that felt like home. The next morning, Abby bounded into the kitchen, her curls flying, her voice bright. Daddy, is Claire your girlfriend now? Tom choked on his coffee. What? Abby grinned, syrup glistening on her chin. You kissed her. I saw. Tom blinked. You saw. Abby nodded solemnly. From the window. It was gross. Tom laughed, the sound spilling into the warm kitchen. Thanks for the honesty. Abby shrugged. I think it means she's your girlfriend. Tom smiled, his chest aching with sweetness. Maybe it does. Abby grinned, her eyes sparkling. Good. Then she can help me make unicorn cookies. Tom laughed again, shaking his head. You never quit, do you? Abby tilted her head, her voice matter of fact. You taught me. Tom stared at her, the truth of that sinking deep. He had taught her persistence. And maybe, just maybe, she had taught him how to hope again. Later that day, Claire joined them for lunch, and Abby wasted no time declaring her plans. We're making unicorn cookies, she announced, her voice bright. And you have to help. Claire laughed, her eyes crinkling. Sounds like a royal decree. Abby nodded solemnly. Because you're the princess. Tom chuckled, watching them, his heart swelling with a joy so fierce it almost hurt. This laughter, this warmth, this fragile, glittering hope, was everything he had been searching for without knowing it. And for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid to hold it. Chapter 13. Christmas Eve Finale. Snow fell in lazy spirals outside the farmhouse windows, frosting the world in white. Inside, the air shimmered with warmth, the scent of cinnamon and pine mingling with laughter, the glow of twinkling lights wrapping the room in magic. Abby darted between the tree and the kitchen like a tiny comet, her curls bouncing, her voice bright. Daddy, Claire says the cookies are ready, she announced, clutching a spatula like a sword. Tom Davenport chuckled, setting down the string of lights he'd been wrestling with. Then I guess we better taste test. Abby grinned, syrup from breakfast still glistening on her chin. Only if you promise not to eat them all. Tom laughed, ruffling her curls. Deal. Claire appeared in the doorway then, her auburn hair catching the glow of the tree lights, her smile soft and steady. She wore a red sweater that made her eyes look like green glass, and Tom felt his breath hitch, quiet, inevitable, like the tide pulling toward shore. Cookies are cooling, she said, her voice warm, and Abby's already claimed the biggest one. Abby gasped. Because I'm the queen. Claire laughed, her eyes crinkling. Fair enough. Tom watched them, his chest aching with a sweetness that felt almost unbearable. This laughter, this warmth, this fragile, glittering hope, was everything he had been searching for without knowing it. And tonight, he wasn't afraid to hold it. The living room glowed with Christmas magic. The tree stood tall, draped in ornaments Abby had picked, stars and snowflakes and one glittery unicorn that hung front and center like a crown jewel. Stockings lined the mantel, and the fire crackled softly, painting the walls in gold. Tom sat on the couch, Abby curled against his side with a mug of cocoa almost as big as her hands. Claire settled beside them, her shoulder brushing his, her presence steady and warm. Outside, snow whispered against the windows, but inside, everything felt bright. Daddy, Abby said suddenly, her voice solemn, is this forever? Tom blinked, his throat tight. What do you mean? Abby shrugged, her curls haloed by firelight. Us, here, Claire, cookies, forever. Tom swallowed hard, his chest aching. He looked at Claire, her eyes shimmering like glass, and felt the truth press against his ribs like a promise. Yes, he said softly. This is forever. Abby grinned, cocoa glistening on her chin. Good, because I like forever. Tom laughed, kissing the top of her head. Me too. Later, after Abby was tucked into bed with visions of unicorn cookies dancing in her head, Tom and Claire sat by the fire, the quiet wrapping around them like a blanket. The tree lights flickered, casting shadows that felt like whispers. You kept your promise? Claire said softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. Tom looked at her, his voice low. What promise? To choose what matters, she said, her eyes steady. To stay. Tom swallowed, the weight of her words sinking deep. I didn't just stay, he said quietly. I found something worth staying for. Claire's breath caught, her lips curving into a smile that felt like home. Tom. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers, and felt the spark. Quiet, steady, undeniable. I don't know what the future looks like, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But I know I want to build it with you. Her eyes shimmered, her laughter melting into a sigh. Then let's build it. Tom smiled, his forehead resting against hers. Together, she whispered, and then he kissed her. Soft, sure, like a promise. Midnight came with snowflakes and carols drifting from the radio. Tom stood by the window, watching the world glitter under the moonlight, Claire's hand warm in his. Behind them, the tree glowed like a beacon, and Abby's laughter echoed faintly from her dreams. Tom thought of the road that had led him here, the loss that had hollowed him, the fear that had chained him, the quiet, relentless hope that had carried him forward. He thought of Abby, her innocence cutting through the fog like a blade. He thought of Claire, her smile like sunlight breaking through clouds. And he thought of the promise he had made to himself the night his world shattered, that he would keep his daughter safe, no matter what. Tonight, he realized safety wasn't just walls and locks and paychecks. It was this. Warmth, laughter, love. He turned to Claire, his voice soft. Merry Christmas. She smiled, her eyes shimmering like stars. Merry Christmas, Tom. Outside, snow fell like blessings, and inside, the world felt whole. Forever wasn't a word he feared anymore. It was a word he believed in.